Thank you, everyone, for joining us for the A&A Legal and Regulatory Webinar 2025 Enterprise SMS and Telemarketing Update. Critical new FCC rules take effect as TCPA litigation spikes. We have Eric Troutman of Troutman Amin LLP joining us this afternoon to discuss what brands need to know right now about critical changes to SMS and telemarketing rules that impact the advertising ecosystem. Eric is known as the Czar in certain legal circles, is one of the country's prominent class action defense lawyers, and is nationally recognized in TCPA litigation and compliance. He has served as lead defense counsel in more than 70 national TCPA class actions and has litigated nearly 1,000 TCPA cases on behalf of clients, including major banks and finance companies. He has represented the financial services industry on important TCPA issues before the FCC. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Eric.
Yay! Hello, all you beautiful people. Thanks for being here. It's actually up to over 700 class actions I've defended, not just 70. All right, folks. So thanks for getting together. This is the first time that I, your humble czar, have attempted to put together an SMS-focused presentation. Those of you who have attended many of my recent webinars or perhaps my speech over at Affiliate Summit West last week, some of these slides are going to be familiar. The end is full of new content. Those of you who have not seen my presentations, this will all be new to you. I'm going to try to do a 101 in the beginning, then like a 201, 301. So let's get moving here. First, everyone needs to understand that the TCPA is the largest litigation cash cow in American history. Because we're so busy, I took out one of the slides, or we have so much to cover today, I took out one of the slides that looked at the spike in recent litigation, over 40% year over year from 2023 to 2024, and 2025 has come out just as hot. Now, there was supposed to be a big change by the FCC around something called the one-to-one rule that we anticipated was going to spike litigation even more. But interestingly, you're going to hear all about this in a bit, both the FCC and the 11th Circuit Court of Appeal came together at the last possible minute, kind of literally, to save industry from that new rule. We're going to chat about that. But today, even without that rule going into effect, more multi-millionaire plaintiffs' lawyers have been made under the TCPA than under any other federal statute. It is simply an abomination, in my opinion, that these folks exist. But if you take a look at their business model, these guys make just a killing. One lawyer, Mike Greenwald's already made like 30 million in fees this year alone. And as you can see here, the highest paid lawyers in America, they are not working at big law. They are not. They are working at these boutiques that are bringing plaintiff side TCPA class actions where associates are getting $500,000 bonuses. And these guys are paying, generally speaking, this is a couple years old now, between $50,000 and $100,000 to each associate above scale, above cravat. So these guys are incredibly well fed. They are incredibly sophisticated. They are incredibly intelligent. And they are coming after really every company in America that is just trying to contact their customers or near customers for either servicing or marketing. And of course, these guys are ringing the bell constantly. So that's why we're having this conversation, okay? Assurance, you guys might have heard, right? Prudential bought Assurance, which is a digital marketplace for insurance, for $3 billion. They got into a bunch of TCPA trouble, and literally within 45 days of a TCPA settlement, Prudential just pulls the plug on Assurance altogether. Citibank just got hit for $29.5 million. Caldwell Banker just paid $20 million. United Health Group, I just did an article today. They just paid $3.5 million, right? So all of these, and of course, you remember ViSalus got hit for $950 million. ViSalus was this, MTM, multi-level marketing, MLM multi-level marketing company. At one point, they had 100,000 enrolled agents, right? And now, just 5 or 6 years later, they get crushed in a TCPA verdict, $925 million, and they declared bankruptcy as a result, right? So very, very important that we understand the TCPA and the risk that the TCPA provides, because the class actions, in most of the things that enterprise is worried about, most of your outreach, most of your behaviors and your conduct, enterprise is worried about regulatory risk. I mean, today, regulatory risk is less of a concern anyway. But even before, the TCPA was very different. This wasn't a situation where you were worried about the FCC or the FTC, although, they do sometimes enforce these rules. Really, it's the private rights of action. It's the class actions being brought by the individual plaintiff's attorneys who represent a class of every single person that you've called or texted. That's what we're here to talk about, is texting, over the last 4 years. And the aggregated damages in these cases, because the damages are, of course, $500 per errant text per violation, right? Up to $1,500. If you're an enterprise, and you're texting at scale, I mean, you can do the math. You send a million text messages a month. That's $500 million in exposure per month that's being developed if you're not doing this right. So the margins here for error are zero. I mean, just zero, which of course is why Troutman and Mean exists as a law firm that's essentially just focused on TCPA and telecom issues and making sure that people are doing the marketing right. Because as I just showed you, if you're doing it wrong, the exposure is incredibly high, and the sharks out there, the plaintiffs' lawyers, are incredibly sophisticated. These are not lazy, bottom feeders that are just out there chasing a couple of bucks. I mean, these guys are ringing the bell for tens of millions of dollars with some regularity. And this last piece down here, please never lose sight of this. Even if you're part of an enterprise, personal liability exists under the TCPA. And this is, I tell people this all the time, like 99% of the areas of law in this country, if you are involved in a tort that your corporation is involved in, you're the guy that pulls the lever and dumps a bunch of oil into the Gulf of Mexico, assuming that's illegal, or maybe it's the Gulf of America now, whatever you call it, you personally don't get sued for that, right? Exxon gets sued, Chevron gets sued, again, assuming that's illegal. But you, as a person that pulled the lever, you don't get sued, right? But the TCPA is different. If you are the person who sets up a campaign, if you're the marketing manager, the digital manager, the person that decides, hey, look, I think this is a good campaign. Heck, if you're the campaign manager, the call center manager, if you're even the poor agent that has the misfortune of getting, assigned the phone call that ends up being illegal, you can be sued personally, even if you only did that as part of your employment, right? So that is why understanding the TCPA is so critical, and making sure that you've got really good legal advice, really good legal advisors, both internally, a good TCPA SME, which I hope all the enterprises have, and of course, outside counsel that really, really knows their stuff and who you rely on to give you that guidance, right? To give you those opinions, so that if somebody screws up, it's the lawyer's fault and not yours personally, right? That's where you want to be. Okay, so let's talk through, and here's a couple of examples that, you guys are not scared enough. Here it is. I start you off in the morning, I just throw a bunch of scary stuff at you. But, it's real. The CEO of Porch, I'm not sure if you guys heard about this. These guys are caught in, they're seeking like tens of millions of dollars from the CEO and a couple of the corporate officers personally. Later on today, we're going to talk about a case involving texting by Allergen, the folks behind Botox. And their VP of marketing was sued personally for like 50 million bucks, and they couldn't get out. So this is really important stuff that you folks really need to understand. And those of you who are lawyers, you need to be talking to your business leads and telling them, hey, look, if you guys want to be aggressive, understand not only is it the company's risk, ultimately it's your risk too, personally. So watch out. And again, all of this chaos, all this madness, companies going bankrupt, $100 million verdicts, I mean, all of this just stems from two very basic concepts that you can find etched into the Telephone Consumer Protection Act, right? Federal statute 47 USC 227 has two big provisions that you need to know. And this is it. It's so simple. It's just two things. One, thou shalt not use regulated technology to contact a cell phone without the appropriate level of consent. When I'm on stage, I usually take the microphone and I do like the 10 Commandments voice. Thou shalt not. It doesn't work because I don't have a microphone. But you can imagine these as like commandments, right? The second one is thou shalt not make unsolicited calls to residential numbers on the do not call registry. That's it. Some shade, flavor, or variation of violating one of these two rules has led to every single one of these verdicts has led to hundreds of millions of dollars in settlements every year for the last 10 years. Every year. And most of those coming from enterprise, coming from big companies that have internal legal departments and compliance officers, and yet somehow these two basic rules keep getting violated because it's trickier than it seems, of course, and that's why we exist. So I was fighting with PowerPoint. I personally did my own PowerPoint, and this is what happens. Sometimes a mistake has happened. So there's supposed to be something else in this slide. And what the slide is supposed to say, you have to use your imaginations now. All right, stay with me. Is that your SMS outreach can violate either one of these. If you are using an automatic telephone dialing system, an ATDS, then that is regulated technology. And so violation of number one can occur if you are sending text messages to a cell phone without the appropriate level of consent. But understand that even if you're dialing manually, very important, I mean, like literally, you've got agents picking up the phone, texting, which I know nobody really does at scale, but assuming, let's just imagine that situation, there's a farm somewhere, people doing that, that can also violate the TCPA if it's for marketing purposes to numbers on the DNC. All right, so please keep that in mind. I think you're all familiar with the DNC rules. You know, you've got 18 months to communicate for marketing purposes after a transaction. You've got 90 days to communicate for marketing purposes, again, manually via text, after an inquiry. You know, these are fairly familiar rules to folks. We're going to dive into a couple of the nuances here in a second. But let's first answer the question of what is regulated technology? Because remember, rule number one, commandment number one is you can't use regulated technology. So what is regulated technology? For purposes of this webinar, what we're primarily talking about is an automatic telephone dialing system. If you are sending a text message manually or sending a text message in a way that is not using an ATDS, then the regulated technology provision does not apply to you. The DNC provision still applies to you, but the regulated technology provision does not apply to you. Important outside of SMS for everyone just to keep in mind, right? The vast majority of TCPA cases that are being filed right now are not about text messages, although trust me, there are plenty of text message cases too. But the primary channel that's drawing the TCPA cases are pre-recorded calls, what you consider to be, you know, traditional robocalls. Calls that have a pre-recorded voice or AI voice, right? Very popular right now to use the generative AI, convert it to you know, a voice sound, and then you can talk. And sometimes people are you know, disguising their voices using AI. All of that is automatically pre-recorded calls. All of that is regulated technology, and it triggers the TCPA. Okay, so please just understand that. Regulated technology includes ATDS, and for text messages, that's what we focused on. And then all forms of pre-recorded calls, pre-recorded communications, voicemails, ringless voicemail, all of that requires the proper level of consent. If it's marketing, that is heightened express written consent, which we're going to talk about here in a bit. Okay, so hopefully all that is crystal clear. So what is so let's just talk about the basic TCPA rules. We're gonna break down one ATDS here in a second. So the basic TCPA rules for SMS right here on the screen. Okay, rule number one is you have to have the proper level of express consent if you are sending text using an ATDS. We're gonna talk about that. Rule number two, this one is interesting. People miss this one all the time. You have to have the proper level of express consent if you are sending an MMS message that is using a voice or a video to deliver a message. Those calls or those text messages are likely, law is still evolving, likely to be treated as a pre-recorded voice call, okay? So if you are embedding a message into an MMS and sending it that way, that is likely to be treated as a pre-recorded voice call. Now, some courts have held otherwise. This is one of these things about the TCPA. Some courts go one way, some courts go another. The federal judges have tremendous power to make decisions. And because this statute is so vague, I'm going to tell you, it's going to get even worse because Chevron deference is gone. We're going to talk about that here in a bit. But you're going to hear me say some courts go one way, some courts go another, right? That's just the way it is in TCPA world, which is why you really need to have great litigators helping you out. All right, so proper level of consent needed for embedded voice or video. And then the last one is, as I already told you, DNC provisions apply if the text is sent for marketing purposes, even if sent manually. Because I love you all, I fumbled around with the stupid little table process thing in WordPerfect and then embedded it into PowerPoint. And this stupid chart took me like 3 hours to do, but it's nice and easy and a little visualization for you, right? So take a picture of the screen. I'm kidding. Or you can. We will send you the slides if you ask for them. But anyway, it's very simple, right? Here's your little chart. If you are sending sending a message using regulated technology, here are your requirements. If you're sending it without regulated technology manually, here are your requirements. Okay, and again, whether or not it's marketing or non-marketing really makes a big difference. Now, I'm assuming most of you are here because we're talking about marketing, right? So if you're sending a text using an ATDS or you've got a sound embedded MMS, you need that express written consent. If you are sending it manually for marketing, you need to scrub the DNC. If they're not on the DNC, you don't need consent. Isn't that crazy? And that's crazy, right? We can still cold market via SMS to consumers in this country that aren't on the DNC, except for in Connecticut. I should put a little asterisk here. States have different rules. SEMA in Washington State is a different set of rules. Connecticut is a different rule. A lot of state-specific things here, okay? So understand this presentation, we're just talking TCPA. We're talking at the federal level. There's a whole nother layer of state law that's beyond what we're going to talk about here today. There's a conference called the Law Conference of Champions where we break all this stuff down at the state level too, but we don't have time to talk about that today. So just federal rules, here you go, nice and easy. So what is an ATDS, right? What is that automatic telephone dialing system? How do you know if your text is regulated technology or not? Well, it's very simple. No, it's not. It's very complicated. So the definition of an automatic telephone dialing system is found in the TCPA at 227A1. It's, to me, it's actually one of the clearest definitions that you're ever going to see in a federal statute, but the courts made a mess of it. And the reason is that the TCPA is the only federal statute that prevents robocalls, the only one. And as worded, the ATDS definition did not provide much of an arsenal. So both the FCC and the courts spend a lot of time kind of expanding the definition. So the Supreme Court, in the case called Facebook a couple years ago, came out and said, okay, knock it off, no more expanding the definition. Here is what an ATDS is. And this is trickier than it looks. You have to, the system is equipment, whatever that means, with the capacity, whatever that means, to do either of two things. Either. One, to randomly or sequentially create phone numbers, which of course none of you are doing, because you wouldn't even waste your time listening to this video. If you were that kind of scumbag, you wouldn't do that. You wouldn't even waste your time. So we know you're not randomly creating phone numbers, but there's an or storing telephone numbers using a random or sequential number generator. Storing telephone numbers using a random or sequential number generator. Now, how do you do that? Now, one way you could do that, of course, is if you're doing a survey, right? You've got a large population set of phone numbers. You want to draw a statistically, relevant random sample. You could use a randomizer. Some people do that. But the Supreme Court said in something called footnote 7, there's another way to do it. And that is if you're using a randomizer or a number generator to determine the sequence in which your text messages are going out, then that also would violate the TCPA. Now, look, I mean, that kind of sounds like a shuffle feature, right? You guys remember like the old iPods, iPod Nano? I mean, I'm of that age, right? That's, to me, that was like the high technology. And they'd have like a shuffle feature, right? I think Amazon Music still has shuffle. Some dialing platforms have shuffle. If you have a shuffle feature in your dialing platform, guess what? That is an ATDS, period, full stop, under Supreme Court law. But the truth is, because of this word capacity, see that word capacity? Even if the dialer does not have a shuffle feature, but it does have some form of back-end latent code that allows for either shuffle or what we actually see a lot is tie breaking. This kind of code sequence right here, which is called a loop or plus plus, you could be in trouble, right? So the bottom line is you actually have to understand the code base of your dialing system in order to know whether or not you're using an ATDS. Now, some courts have taken kind of a different view. And they basically have said, look, unless you're generating random phone numbers, get out of here. And a lot of courts are gonna do that, right? I mean, courts, it just depends on your judge. Like I told you earlier, some judges are going to faithfully apply the Supreme Court. They're going to look at this code. They're going to say, hey, it's got the capacity to do this, randomization or number generation in connection with the sequencing of phone numbers. And that's what the Supreme Court said in footnote 7. So therefore, you're using an auto dialer. Other courts are going to say, get out of here. If you're not randomly calling people, you're not a problem. All right. So just understand that whether or not you're using regulated technology turns on to a large degree your code base and the philosophy of the court. So if you are a compliant organization that takes risk seriously, you should be thinking to yourself, look, unless I'm absolutely positive that my dialer is not an ATDS, does not have this code pack in it, then I am going to treat it as if it is an auto dialer. And I'm only going to send these messages with the right level of consent. And for those of you that are doing mass blast text messaging or mass, not even blasting, but like, mass communications via text, probably a good idea to assume that this is an auto dialer and to make sure you have the right level of consent. There are purpose-built dialers that are, not ATDSs that allow you to do outreach at scale. Things like Safe Select, you may have heard of. There's a company called Convosa that just came out with one called Call Catalyst. These are dialing platforms, texting platforms that I have looked at myself, and Drips Initiate is another one, and made sure they don't have any of these codes in it so that people can rely on them, enterprise can rely on them to send text at scale. Otherwise, you should just assume that you are using an ATDS. And this slide here, just a reminder, circling back again, whether or not you're using an ATDS, if you are using any kind of embedded messaging with sound in your text, that's going to trigger the TCPA's regulated technology provision. And of course, if you're using voicemails, pre-recorded calls, any of this, also trigger the statute. I know that's not what we're talking about today, but you have to keep it in mind because that's what drives all the litigation. Okay, so as we've already explained, you're going to need different levels of consent depending on the sort of message that you are sending. In order for you to send a marketing message using regulated technology, let's assume that you're using the ATDS to send your text messaging for marketing purposes. Now you have to have express written consent, okay? Express written consent, period, full stop. Now, let's say you are going to be sending, one of these messages manually to a consumer who's on the DNC. Let's say you are outside of 90 days, right? Because you got 90 days on an inquiry. But let's say they have not yet bought something, right? So you're at like day 91, right? In order to do a message to a consumer on the DNC on day 91, you have to have something called a prior express invitation or permission, which is different than prior express written consent, but it still has to be in writing. I know it's confusing. We're going to look at a case that will give you a great concrete example of this so we can kind of wrap our heads around it. And then third is you have to have regular old express consent for informational purposes. Now, most of you are like, yeah, that's easy, because remember, for many years, since literally 2009, so it's been 15 years, you can presume that you have the right level of consent anytime a consumer gives you a phone number and you are sending an informational message for a purpose, quote, closely related to the purpose for which the consumer gave you the phone number. So, we see this most often like debt collection cases. The consumer provided the phone number on the credit application. Credit, they use a credit card. They don't pay it back. Debt collector makes a phone call. They're allowed to use that phone number. That's been the case since 2009, but that might have just changed. So let's find out. Let's go through each one of these very quickly. First, express written consent. 64-1200 F9 is where you're going to find this, 47 CFR. This is going to have your definition, okay? I'm just going to put it on the screen. We're not going to go through this together. But it's pretty thick, as you can see. I'm going to give you a graphic here in a second that shows you all 9 elements that you need to have. These are called the Troutman 9. At least I call them the Troutman 9. You can call them the Troutman 9 if you want, or call them something else. But there's 9 things that you have to have in your disclosure in order to have it be valid express written consent. And this is a definition, by the way, that the FCC almost changed. In fact, when I first put together this webinar with the good folks at A&A, how great are they? By the way, they're fantastic. Literally, I was going to be talking to you about the one-to-one rule, but because of the incredible, heroic, shall we say, efforts of trade organizations, including R.E.A.H., the organization I'm the president of, to prevent this thing from going into effect, we're not going to be talking about that very much. We're going to spend like 2 minutes on it. Before it was going to be like 45 minutes. Now it's 2 minutes. But anyway, so this is the express written consent definition. This is your DNC definitions. Okay, so again, this definition, express written consent, applies to regulated technology, ATDS text messages. The DNC provisions, right, also 47 CFR 64-1200, but now you're in section C, not F. You're now looking at C. Here are different definitions. Now, if you look at sub 2, right, down, it's C22. This is where you've got the definition of express invitation or permission, right? So it's a lesser standard. For our purposes, just understand it has to be in writing, but it's a lesser standard, okay? So 90 days, it doesn't have to be in writing, it's an inquiry. Day 91 to infinity, it has to be in writing, but it doesn't have to be full express written consent. It doesn't have to have the Troutman 9 to contact the number on the DNC. Now remember, you also have these time limitations. Don't forget about the time restrictions, okay? 7-Eleven just got sued because they're sending marketing messages as part of their recurring text club. And look, most of these cases come out of text clubs, right? You're a retailer, you want to enroll somebody, do engagement with the consumer. I like engagement. Engagement's good, but you're going to be sending, offers and promotions. Okay, that's fine, but you have to pay attention to the time restrictions. Now, what's interesting is that the way the CFR is written, I think the time restrictions probably don't apply if you have full express written consent, which is fascinating. And I think that's what 7-Eleven was probably thinking, because they were sending messages at like 9:45 at night. There's also, of course, issues with making sure that you know where that consumer is at the time that you're sending the text message. And these rules can be very aggressive. And frankly, there's no margin for error here either, right? Strict liability. If this guy's in California and you've got a Florida phone number and you're texting what you think is 9 a.m., but you're actually waking me up at 6 a.m., that's a problem, right? And whether or not you know is irrelevant. If you've got a data set that demonstrates that you should have known, you're cooked. But even if you don't have that data set, they could bring that class action and use your data sets for other individuals that you can identify as having not resided in the time zone where the text message went out, the time it went out. And this is what 7-Eleven is facing right now. So please keep this in mind. And again, as I see down here, there's a little plug for Law Conference of Champions. As I mentioned, state rules are different. Florida famously is 8 o'clock, not 9 o'clock, right? Different states though have different rules. So you have to keep track of those states as well. We're not going to talk about states today. If you want to attend that conference and learn about the states, we'll do that. But today we're not going to talk about states. It's just federal. But keep in mind the time zone limitations. All right. So regular consent. Remember I told you you can presume consent. Somebody gives you the phone number, right? And there's really like nothing else that they do. They just give you the phone number and you're just going to reach out to them because they got to pick something up at the pharmacy or, you're debt collecting or you're reminding them or the gate changed, right? At the airport. All of these kinds of messages were informational. And before, hey, look, you felt really solid. There was a huge body of law coming out of an FCC ruling from 2009 that basically said, if the consumer gave you the phone number for a purpose that was closely related to what you're texting them for, fire away, including using regulated technology, right? Including using pre-recorded calls, including using an ATDS. If they gave you the phone number, that consent was presumed. Problem, big problem. The Chevron deference is now out the window. Following a case called McKesson to the Supreme Court, we expect the Hobbs Act deference is now going to be out the window. There was this case called IMC that we're going to talk all about right now. It went very favorably in the short term on a narrow issue, but it's going to be very damaging in the long term on broader issues because what it says is essentially the FCC's ruling on express consent, those rulings, they're not enforceable. That's what this court says. We'll see what other courts say. And the standard now, I'm going to give it to you later, for express written consent is consent that is clearly and unmistakably stated. So if the consumer just gave you the phone number, that's implied, right? That's not consent that is clearly and unmistakably stated, especially not to use an auto dialer or regulated technology. So now we've gone all the way back to 2008, where all of a sudden these consents that we thought were so valid for messaging and for other purposes, maybe they're not anymore. That's a huge shift, and it's really bad news, and it comes out of a ruling that was really kind of viewed as a big win. All right, so we're going to talk about third-party lead generation very quickly. I'm going to speed it up a little bit because we're falling behind. It's my fault. So this is what third-party lead gen, those of you that are buying leads to make outbound calls, you know what it looks like. This is LendingTree, right? Very familiar. You fill out this form, you click view my rates. You don't really just get rates, do you? You get a bunch of phone calls, and you see that little hyperlink down there. Hopefully you can see. I don't know if you can see. There's a little hyperlink down there that says network partners. When you click that, right, that's who you're giving consent to call you to. And if we take a look at that, watch this. This is so much fun. These are all the companies on that network partners page. Look at all these thousands of names of individuals that you are agreeing to receive robocalls from, right? So that's not great. That's today. That's happening right now. Go to LendingTree right now. You'll see that. And LendingTree is one of the best. There's a lot of companies and websites that are even worse. And those of you that are buying leads understand, like, you're buying this, like, you're buying leads from companies that are potentially tricking consumers, which is not good. And even like in the first party setting, I'll pick on poor Wells Fargo. I love Wells Fargo. There's errors everywhere in these flows, right? This is on the Wells Fargo's website right now. You go there and you've got this little box that says I consent to be contacted, which, by the way, probably doesn't comply with the TCPA to begin with, doesn't have all Troutman 9. It references Wells Fargo Bank NA, and then when you actually kind of take a broader look at the consent for contact hyperlink right there, it's a different entity that they're getting consent for. So who's got the consent? So it's a real issue, even the first party, when you're trying to generate your own leads. Now, the FCC didn't like any of this. And here's your 2 minutes on the thing that was supposed to take 45 minutes. And so they put together a rule. It's called the new one-to-one rule that was going to modify the definition there if the 47 CFR 64-1200 F9. And the new F9 was going to say, as you see highlighted here, that the consumer has to agree to hear from no more than one identified seller at a time, and to cut down on the multi-vertical leads, right? Person goes to a lending website and ends up consenting to receive solar calls regarding solar panels. The FCC said that the consent has to be logically and topically related to the transaction, the interaction that led to the consent. Okay, so that was supposed to take place. Like, this rule, man, it was put out first in December of 2023. Based on a lot of hard work by R.E.A.C.H. Again, the Responsible Enterprises Against Consumer Harassment. That's a trade organization that Eric Troutman, the Czar, your friend, is the president of. We worked really hard. We worked with the Small Business Association over there at the FCC. We were able to get a full year, not just 6 months, but a full year before this became effective. During that year, the law changed. During that year, a different trade organization took a legal challenge. During that year, we as R.E.A.H continued to advocate. We had 7 different meetings with the commission in 2024 to try to get them to modify the rule or slow it down. And through all of these efforts, with President Trump becoming the president on January 20th, R.E.A.H filed an emergency petition to stay the ruling. And through tireless and ridiculous efforts, I will not even try to catalog for you, Friday at 4:35 p.m., this is Friday, January 24th, the rule is supposed to go into effect Monday, January 27th. I mean, this is high stakes drama. Friday, January 24th at 4:35 p.m. Eastern, the FCC grants the stay. Friday at 4:55 Eastern, 20 minutes later, the 11th Circuit Court of Appeal strikes the whole thing down. So this was an incredible group effort by a bunch of different trade organizations following different kind of paths, trying to do different things, pushing different buttons, and both found pay dirt. And the rule, which was supposed to go into effect to impose one-to-one consent on January 27th, never went into effect. Yes, that's me outside of the FCC building looking all proud. It was a great day. Very, very exciting. I'm not going to break down all that ruling and everything that it means, but if you want to learn about it, our YouTube channel at Deserve to Win, we have a 45-minute session where we just break down IMC, we break down the ruling, we explain what it means and how we got there and the analysis and why. Because the why really matters for those of you that are interested in knowing what the future looks like for TCPA and telecom and really any regulatory scheme. This IMC case might change everything we know about how agency rules are looked at. So I highly encourage you to watch this video on the Deserve to Win website, but we don't have time to go through it all today. So where does this leave us? Where it leaves us, as I told you earlier, is express written consent now is consent that is clearly and unmistakably stated in a clear and conspicuous fashion. That is the rule that the 11th Circuit has set forth, okay? And that's probably the rule that's going to be adopted across the country now. So there's 2 components to this, right? To be clearly and unmistakably stated in clear and conspicuous fashion, 2 components. One is the content requirements that you saw back in F9, and there is also formatting requirements. I know we're going a little quick, but you can rewatch this video. It'll be on our YouTube channel, hopefully. So the Troutman 9, that's your content. That's what you have to have in the form. And then the format is what the form has to look like to be valid. And again, we're talking about express written consent for regulated technology right now. We're not talking about prior express invitation or permission for calls on the DNC. We'll talk about that in a second too. So here's the Troutman 9. Here's your glorious slide that we put together for you, totally free, mock disclosure that you can use, the little pieces. Other law firms would charge you for this. We do it for free. We put it on our website. You can take a look at it right here. It's great. It's glorious. Use it. Love it. Great. All right. So here's what I want to talk to you about, right, is the difference between prior express written consent and prior express invitation or permission. So this case just came out. You see right here, February 5th, this when we did the article. This is on tcpaworld.com, by the way. I haven't even plugged TCPA World. That's the blog. Hopefully you all follow tcpaworld.com. We break down every case every day. In this blog, we're talking about a new case against vintage stock. Really, really interesting case. A lady goes and buys something at vintage stock and is asked to put her phone number into the POS system. Okay, the point of sale. The point of sale has these words right here. Enter your phone number to receive coupons and sales notices. Message and data rates may apply. That's all it says. That's it. And on top of that, the lady alleges that she told the sales rep, hey, look, I'm going to put my phone number in here, but I don't want any marketing messages. And the sales rep's like, oh, yeah, no, we just use your phone number so that if you want to return something, like we've got a record of it, right? That's what the sales lady says. So the plaintiff puts in her phone number and wouldn't you know it, she gets phone calls after 18 months because, again, 18 months, vintage stock is allowed to send her text messages manually because she's a customer. But after 18 months, they're still texting her. Bad idea. And they now, when they get sued for a DNC violation, they say, hey, look, this plaintiff filled out this little form and said, enter your phone number to receive coupons and sales notices. The court, looking at the issue, basically said, look, this probably wouldn't be prior express written consent, but since vintage stock did not use an ATDS, since this is not regulated technology, it doesn't matter. All that matters is whether or not prior express invitation or permission was given. And this language, although it does not comply with F9, is sufficient to constitute prior express invitation. So this specific court, and this is a brand new case, said that this does qualify as DNC for DNC purposes, but it wouldn't qualify for express written consent. And I just love that. I love being able to see that distinction, see that daylight, see what, what rule looks good for one, what rule looks good for the other, because there's, of course, two restrictions here. Now, I will say, this case just came out, has not been appealed. It's a district court level ruling. I personally would not be comfortable relying on POS language this lean. I would want to see something closer to the Troutman 9, even for DNC purposes. And I know there's a difference. I know that too. But if we're going to be, trying to be a little conservative here, not get ourselves sued, I would be Troutman 9. Here is a case that shows that you might not need the full Troutman 9 for a DNC case. All right. Before I forget, connect with me on LinkedIn, Eric J. Troutman. Shoot me a connection. I will accept. Subscribe to TCPA World. Follow us on our YouTube channel. Subscribe to our magazine and get our year-end review, which is free and really cool. Just ask me for it. Okay, we move on. Also, keep in mind, a lot of things are changing. We've already kind of addressed a couple of those. John Thune, I just want to highlight this, is now the Senate Majority Leader. John Thune is the guy who wrote the Trace Act. The staffer who helped him write the Trace Act was somebody named Olivia Trusty. Olivia Trusty is Trump's nominee to be the 5th FCC commissioner. So these folks, both the guy that's in charge of the Senate and the new FCC commissioner, are very, very anti-robocall. Okay, just because they're conservatives, just because they're on the right, does not mean that we're going to feel free to go out there and text people. Remember, Brendan Carr actually supported the one-to-one rule. He was also leaning toward not being so friendly to business on one-to-one. Now, it was his office ultimately that decided to stay the one-to-one rule. So I think we got to him a little bit, changed his mind a little bit. But at the end of the day, right, just because we have a new administration does not mean that there's going to be any lightening up on robocalls, even though, look, CFPB is gone. I think most of the federal regulators are going to be weakened. I don't think that's going to apply to robocalls. And of course, even if the feds get weakened, the states are continuing to be very aggressive. Now, I want to talk a little bit, speaking about regulators going after people, about format. Remember, I told you there's two requirements. Content, I give you content. Let's talk about format real quick. You see here in the lower left-hand side, this looks like a pretty good flow, right? You got this little I confirm, got a phone number, all the language is above the button. But the FTC sued saying this, that this is not an acceptable form. Well, first of all, the content of what you were consenting to had nothing to do with American Career Guide. It wasn't getting careers. They were going to be offering you like debt solutions and stuff. So that's problem number one. Problem number two is you see that I confirm. I know it's very small. You can't really see the language, but it says, I confirm that all my information is accurate. And then it carries on to say, and consent to be called. The FTC is arguing, well, when you say I confirm that all my information is accurate, you're tricking the consumer because they think they're just confirming, verifying that they gave accurate information, not that they're confirming that they are giving you consent. And the FTC found that to be a dark pattern. Okay, so again, we're just highlighting kind of the formatting and how you're going forward with your presentation to the consumer. And I want to give you a quick example. I know we're already only 19 minutes to go, and I've got so much more to cover. Hope you guys are as energized by this as I am. But let me give you an example. Take a look at this website, okay? This is lowermybills.com, a famous website that was sold to Rocket Mortgage. Rocket Mortgage owns this from a company called Core Digital. It is a non-public amount that was sold for, but I've heard it was a lot of money, hundreds of millions. That's what I've heard. I don't know, but I think it was. And so we've got this nice little flow, right? You're going to a website, 50% already done. See that little dial up there says 50%, 2 little questions. Okay, no problem as a consumer. Like, I'm going to calculate, see that red arrow, calculate new payment. That's cool. I want to calculate my new payment. I want to know what my new payment would be if I go with the new company as a mortgage experts. They claim they're mortgage experts. This sounds pretty good, right? So 50%, 2 questions. Sure, I'll fill out this form. You press to continue, and you're still at 50%. A little weird. I'm not sure that's how fractions work, but fine. 2 more little things, fill out those, no problem. Calculate my new payment, exciting, press to continue, and now we're at 75%. Okay, not sure how that worked. But now instead of 2 questions, you've now got 8 questions you have to answer. Fine, I'm a consumer. I'm a little bit annoyed by this, but whatever, came this far, fill out the form. See that green button says calculate, right? So you're feeling really good, right? Click calculate. Now I'm gonna get my new rates. That's why we filled this out. Calculate, that button means to me that I'm going to calculate something, right? So I push the calculate button. What do we get? Oh, now we're 90% of the way there. And now we've got a whole bunch more questions. Fine, I'm annoyed, but I start filling out this form, right? Again, come this far, might as well see it through. All right, I got a little box here at the end. I got a calculate button again. All right, this is it, right? This is it. You've got the box, you've got the calculate. I'm going to click this button and I'm going to get, right? I'm going to get my mortgage rates. That's what I'm going to get. Here we go. No, now we're 99% done. Again, whoever put this flow together has no idea how fractions work, but they do know how human psychology works, which is every one of these pages is specifically designed to give the person the belief that they're almost done and that they've already invested so much into it that they might as well see it through, right? This is treating human beings like hamsters on a wheel, and this is a dark pattern. This is the sort of thing that the FTC and the courts hate to see. But you as lead buyers, you as brands who are going to be taking on leads, right? You're going to be looking at this. You're going to think this is a great high intent consumer who gave me 15, 20, 25 data points because they're so interested in a refinance, and you are going to buy that lead. And this is of course in the mortgage vertical, but there are similar practices and leads in all verticals. So no matter what kind of product you're selling, if your marketing team is out there buying third-party leads, you need to understand that this is sort of things what's going on, because guess what? When they finally get to this last page where it says calculate your free results, the court refuses to enforce these provisions because 1, they're way down below the button, 2, they're way tiny, and 3, the consumer was tricked the entire time. So the courts are not enforcing these provisions. And by the way, when you click finally after all of this, calculate your free results, guess what you get? You have completed your first step. Click on the loan below that interests you. So you go through that entire flow, you get nothing. There's no calculate, there's no results, there's no quotes. In fact, all you get is a wall of offers, and you have to click the button that says get started. It was a complete trick, a trap, a ruse. And this is how consumers are being picked on right now. And no surprise, Rocket Mortgage is in a ton of trouble in a couple of cases where courts are refusing to enforce these forms. And they're on an emergency appeal right now, basically having admitted that if the certification order, which was potentially going to be granted, this could be the end of the company. This is huge, huge deal. Don't let it happen to you guys, right? Don't let this stuff happen to you. And so here are the cases. So if you want to go take a look at these again, this is off of tcpaworld.com. It's crazy the way that Rocket Mortgage essentially got hacked, right? Simply having a credential with assurance, and don't let it happen to your company, right? Don't buy leads that are bad leads, especially don't buy them at scale. Because if you're buying 1 million, 10 million, 100 million, some companies do, leads from a single source, and that source ends up having tricked people or used bad data or committed fraud, you are going to be on the hook for every single call that you made in reliance on that lead, not them, you, right? This is what we're talking about here. And this is true in the SMS channel as much as the voice channel. Again, font too small, below the button equals skulls on a website. You don't want to be skulls, okay? And again, going back to Lending Tree, based on what we just learned, we look at Lending Tree. It's supposed to be a good company, right? Somebody that we all know. Like, look at these little tiny words underneath a button. The button says view my rates. It doesn't say accept terms. It doesn't say, you agree to be contacted, to robocalls. It doesn't say any of that. It just says view my rates. Yet when you click that button, you're not going to get rates. You're going to get phone calls. So you got to be careful out there, right? You got to be careful. Other places you have to be careful. Call to action displays. I know. Retailers in particular, but really everybody just loves to use these things. And I'm going to tell you, most of the time they're unenforceable. They can be enforceable, but the devil's in the details. And man, do you have to track this? And I can't tell you, man, I have represented so many major brands who have had the hardest time with call to actions. And they've got these text clubs, and many times they've got millions of people enrolled in their text club, and a lawsuit comes in, and I'm like, okay, well, how did you get consent for this person? Well, I don't know. Like, what do you mean you don't know? Well, in June of 2022, they were enrolled. Okay, how? Oh, well, they had to opt in. Okay, how did they opt in? Well, we don't know, but that's the process. You need to be keeping track of how a consumer opted in. Every single consumer opted into every single text club that you have. The best example I have right here is this Weisbian case versus Allergen. So what I was telling you about, where the VP of marketing got personally sued, another executive got personally sued along with Allergen. This was a Botox call to action, right? It was like, it was a TV commercial, and respond, send half off to short code 1234 to get half off of Botox. And so people were doing that, and getting text messages, and the court, you might think, oh, that's fine, what's the problem? The court's like, well, that's not express written consent. Somebody sending you a code is not express. It's not a written signed agreement, guys. It's not valid. It's not binding. It's nothing, right? So you've got to be really, really careful. I had another case representing an NHL team. This is all public record. NHL, like a National Hockey League team. it was sending out text to people in its booster club, in its text club, right? And they were just getting phone numbers because they would put on the screen, send X phone number to, or say, whatever, say ducks, it wasn't the ducks to this short code to enroll in our text program. And they were just getting blasted with promotional messages from the team. Guys, that's not express written consent, right? So these are real serious issues, and companies are, they're twisting ankles and skinning their knee on just really low-hanging things, guys. Like express written consent applies even in this context. Now, again, if you're using automated technology, if you're sending these texts manually, okay, fine. Maybe this is going to be treated as express prior invitation or permission. Remember, we talked about the difference between the D&C consent and the express written consent for regulated technology. But assuming that you're sending out mass texting and assuming that your platform might be an ATDS, you got to be real careful with this, guys, because it gets people sued all the time. Double opt-ins is a way, because so there's two risks here, right? To keep in mind with text message programs, one risk is obviously you didn't get express written consent, but another risk is wrong numbers. Consumer that is actually using their phone to send a text message, that is unlikely to create a wrong number because they are using their phone from their phone number, right? But let's say you've got a POS, point of sale. Lots of people like to do this. Tons of people like to do this. There was a huge number of SMS cases that were brought against cannabis companies because for some reason, these dispensaries, I've never actually been to one that's actually true, even though I went to Berkeley. So it's, I'm allowed, but I never have. But apparently, if you go to one of these, they make you give your phone number. Basically, it's like you have to validate your identity or something. I'm not sure. Anyway, that's what I've been told. So you put your phone number in, but of course, they were using that phone number to market to people, and a huge number of text message TCPA cases were being brought against dispensaries in the cannabis industry a couple of years ago. But this is the case I want to focus on, which is Circle K. Really interesting case. Circle K has a pretty good process, right? They have a POS system. You have to enter your phone number. Pretty good disclosure on the POS as to what's going to happen. Pretty good disclosure. Better than vintage stocks. And once it goes in, then they'll do a double opt-in, right? They're not going to enroll you in the program unless you actually say yes to a subsequent MFA, multi-factor authentication, double opt-in option, right? Sounds good. What's the problem? Well, the problem is, as you can see right here with this language, Circle K used marketing language in their opt-in. Respond yes to get offers via text, and they include their link, right? Now, this is not super markety, right? They're not like, oh, Circle K is the best in the world. It's not super markety, but it was markety enough. And yes, that's a word, markety. It's markety enough that this court said, hey, look, I'm going to send it to the jury. The jury is going to decide whether or not this is marketing or not. And so you have to keep in mind, if you're going to use a double opt-in, you have to be very careful. Now, the reason why this was an issue, you might be thinking, well, why'd they get sued? Because it was a wrong phone number, right? That person put the wrong phone number into the POS. So somebody else got these three messages. Because these three messages were markety, they were treated as solicitations and violated the D&C rule as to the consumer that actually received the phone call. And yes, the line is that thin between life and death in TCPA world. So hopefully you guys are all tracking this. If you're going to use a double opt-in, which I do encourage generally, make sure that it is not markety. I like to see the inbound calls, digital advertising channels. We're going to go real fast here. If you can generate inbound traffic as opposed to relying on outbound traffic, much, much safer. Moving on. Remember, consumers can always revoke consent. Even today, some companies, poor Albertsons, I love Albertsons, it's my favorite grocery store, stuck in a TCPA class action because allegedly they failed to honor a stop request. If a consumer says stop to a text message, this is so easy. You have to stop. Today, you have a reasonable time frame. Courts are usually pretty strict about that, though. And today, what I like is that the courts are pretty aggressive in saying that you only have to stop what that message is about. The great case is Walmart. I love this one, right? It's one of these prescription pickup cases. The guy was going to the store to pick up some order at Walgreens or Walmart, sorry. And Walmart was sending text messages and just to say, hey, your pickup is ready, your pickup is ready, your pickup is ready. The plaintiff in this case is a notorious litigator named Nathan Barton. I hate even saying the name. And so he would say stop, and then he would sign up for another thing, and he would say stop, and he would sign up for another thing, he would say stop, and he sued Walmart. And the court said, no, every one of these transactions was a different transaction. And if I remember correctly, actually, he wasn't even doing it. It was somebody else allegedly had filled out a new transaction, according to Barton. It wasn't me. I didn't do it. Somebody else did it, right? So he got One message said stop, got another message said stop, got another message said stop, all due to different, essentially, pickups at Walmart. And he sued, and the court said, no, that stop only meant for that one transaction, that one occurrence at the store. That's it. It did not stop all communications from Walmart. So that's great, right? That's the state of the law today. But drum roll, April 15th, all of that changes. It changes in the worst possible way. And there's way too much content here for me to break it down for you in the remaining 5 minutes that we have. But for what you need to understand is that a stop message to any informational message that requires consent come April 11th is going to require you to stop, wait for it, all texting and all calls across all channels, across all business units for all purposes that require consent, period, full stop. A revocation is going to require you to stop everything. Let's just ruminate, just a little moment of silence as we let that sink in for enterprise. One business unit sends one message that gets a stop. All of your business units have to stop for all purposes. This is terrible. This is the worst thing that could possibly have happened, but nobody was paying attention to the FCC. Only R.E.A.H was, my organization. R.E.A.H was successful because the FCC was going to do this and then say you only have 24 hours to comply. We at least got 10 business days, so I guess you're welcome for that, but that's obviously cold comfort because obviously this is a massive change, just a massive change. And again, the waterfall here is if you send a marketing message and you get a stop, you have to stop all marketing across all channels, both text and telephonic. If you get a stop to an informational message, you have to stop all communications for informational purposes or for marketing purposes, again, across all units and all channels. And if you get a stop to something that doesn't even require consent, let's say a MFA or a fraud notification, now you have to stop all messages across all channels for all purposes, period. Okay, so it's insanity. The good news, if you want to call it that, it's really barely even marginally good news, is that you do get one chance, thanks to Capital One, you get one chance to get a rebuttal. Not a rebuttal. Bad word fell out of my mouth here at the end. Not a rebuttal. One chance to get a clarification from the consumer in terms of what they want. So for instance, they say stop, you're a Walmart, you say stop to a notification that that your order is ready. Walmart is allowed to send one-time message that says, do you mean stop regarding this order? Or do you mean never hear from us again? Press 1 for one, 2 for the other. Probably better worded than that. You get one chance. Okay. If the consumer does not respond, then you're stuck with these rules. If the consumer does respond, then you have to honor whatever the consumer says. Okay. So please understand these rules go into effect April 11th. Unlike the one-to-one rule, there is no appeal challenging this right now. I mean, something could change because it's wild, wild west, right? One day there's a CFPB, the next day there's a CFPB. I don't know. So something could change. But today, this is going into effect, and this is going to change everything that you think you know about your outreach strategy, because now you have to be really thoughtful about who you're texting and why, because if you send one wrong message to somebody that doesn't want to hear from it, that is the end of your ability to contact that consumer forever, for all time, for all purposes. Yay. All right, I've got some more slides. We're going to stop because I want to get at least a couple questions. David, if you've got some time, you want to throw something at me?
Yeah, sure. We had a bunch of questions come in. First one here is what is considered a manual message? Button push on a cell phone, I assume, qualifies. What about the use of a laptop client that includes SMS functionality?
Anything that is not an ATDS is manual. Okay, and so you have to understand those rules I was giving you earlier. And by the way, if you have questions, just email me, troutman@troutmanamin.com. I can try to help you rather than try to squeeze these things in here at the last minute. So if you are sending, from your phone, that's fine. If you are sending using any kind of a platform, though, it doesn't matter that you're clicking to send, right? It's not human intervention. That's irrelevant. People think, oh, I'm clicking to dial, so I'm not using an auto dialer. Wrong. We're not talking about auto dialers. We're talking about automatic telephone dialing systems. And if a system is assisting you to know what number to dial next, and you're just clicking it, that could be an auto dialer. Even if the system is a workflow tool that's populating and popping a screen and giving the phone number, that could be an auto dialer. Okay. Again, an automatic telephone dialing system covered by the TCPA. So you have to know how your code works. You have to know what the capabilities of your system are beyond just how you're using it. The way you're using it doesn't determine whether or not you're using an ATDS. What else we got?
Here's one. Does the FCC define a robocall or robotext?
No. Robocall and robotext is actually irrelevant. Okay. There's no such word You cannot be sued for sending a robocall. That's not a word that exists in federal law. You get sued for sending a call using regulated technology, either an automatic telephone dialing system or a pre-recorded artificial or AI voice message, or a call for marketing purposes to the DNC without an EVR or an inquiry. All right, those are, if you want to call them robocalls, that's what's regulated. The word robocall doesn't appear, doesn't exist, doesn't matter. In fact, courts have actually refused to let people use the word robocall in TCPA trials because it's prejudicial and not probative, because the word actually has no meaning.
I think we have time for maybe one more. What's the request consent for manual telemarketing calls if the customer is on the company's specific DNC list?
Oh, fabulous question. Thank you so much for that one. If you're on the company specific DNC list, express written consent, full express written consent, the full Monty is required. That is a big trick that bad litigators use for poor enterprise. You know, they'll call in and say, leave me alone, I don't want to hear from you. And then they'll like email, hey, will you call me? Oh, it's a total setup, right? You cannot fall for that. And if they call you back and they tell your agent to call, that is a trap. It is a trick. We see this all the time. Don't fall for it. You have to get that express written consent. Yeah, usually the customer service department of enterprise will actually just send an email and say, hey, look, I know this is kind of silly, but we need you to fill out this form before we can call you because you're on our DNC list. It sucks, but that's the way you have to do it. There are consequences to putting yourself on that list, right? So consumers need to understand that. This was fun, guys. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, we want to be respectful of your time and everyone's time, so I'll turn it back over to Megan.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Eric. And as we mentioned before, this is recorded and we will be sending out the slides. We'd like to thank Eric for joining us today and for all of you participating in this webinar. Be sure to look for information on our upcoming webinars in the coming weeks. And from all of us on A&A's Law, Ethics, and Government Relations team, thank you for joining us today. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.